Good morning and welcome to class 24 of Developmental Psychology, Psych 250 for the NDSU Summer 2017 term. So I've made a decision based on email feedback I've gotten. A lot of students are not going to be able to make it to the hangout tomorrow to work on the project. And so I think the best thing is to just cancel the hangout. And that'll give you another day to work on the project. And you'll just need to send me your worksheets by noon if you can. If you need more time, if you send them to me by midnight, that I'll accept them and not count you off. Um, and then what I'll do is over the weekend, I'd prefer to have them on noon Friday because if I get them by noon Friday, then Friday afternoon I will look at them, get them back to you, and then you can start writing over the weekend on Saturday. But what I will do is by the end of the day Saturday, we'll have everybody's worksheets um, read, and I'll provide you with feedback, and then you can work on writing on Sunday. Um, but if you do get it to me by noon on Friday, or at least before probably 3, because I'll probably go home at 3 on Friday, then I will look at it before I go home, and then you'll have all day Saturday to work too. So, no hangout on Friday. Just work on the worksheets, get them to me um, by midnight on Friday, but shoot for noon, and that'll give you a whole day to work on the project. I think that's probably for the best. Um, it's just there's too many people. You would think 9 people it wouldn't be hard to plan a meeting for, but when you've got 9 people who are none of whom are physically, or very few of whom are physically present in Fargo, and then you add to that a lot of people are doing summary things. It just sorry, I have a lip gloss on my desk that I like to play with, and it apparently has a hole in it, and got I've got lip gloss over my hands now. Um, anyway, it's just too complicated. So let's just plan on you just doing it by. We'll just do it by email. And if I'm concerned by your progress, then I'll schedule a hangout with you, and we can talk one on one to make sure you're in the right where you need to be. All right. Today we're going to talk about emotional and personality development in adulthood. We've got, I was just looking today, we have 3 classes left, 3 lecture classes, and then we have our final, and we're done. So we are really winding down, and I just want to say really enjoyed working with you all, and I think you all are making great progress. I enjoy reading your discussions, and so this has been a really great experience for me teaching online, and I hope that you've enjoyed the class as well. Um, so today we're going to be talking about really the more psychological foundations of adulthood. And then on Monday we'll be talking about psychological well-being. And then Tuesday we're going to talk about relationships. And then our last lecture class, which is going to be Wednesday of next week, we'll be talking about um, um, dying, the end of life, which is the end of the lifespan. And then Thursday we'll have our peer reviews, and we'll do all of that by email. I think I said that already, but I think that's going to be the easier way, just with everyone's schedule the way it is. And then Friday is our final exam. So busy, busy times, but I think we can do it. I have every confidence that everyone will be able to do it. I've been very impressed so far with your work. Now, I talked about when we started adulthood, there's sort of a sub-stage of young adulthood called emerging adulthood. And this is a period of delayed transition into adult roles that lasts from about the age of 18 to 25. And so it's not really a formal stage of development or period of development because not everybody experiences it, first of all, and it's not defined by any marked physical or cognitive changes. It's just a social social experience that typically happens with people who are in college. Um, During this period, there's a lot of identity development going on, and what's happening during emerging adulthood is we have evaluation of possibilities and existing beliefs. So during this period, people between the ages of 18 to 25 are really evaluating what their goals are, what can they accomplish in their life, what are reasonable pursuits for them, and also what they believe. Is what they believe really consistent with their identity, or is it something that they've just kind of been pressured into their whole life? During this period, the most important thing is establishing an identity. It's even more important than finishing school or getting married and having a family. And so during this period of, 7 years, you're mostly trying to figure out who you are. Um, like I said, it's not seen worldwide. It only exists in cultures where adult roles are delayed. So mostly Western industrialized cultures where people have the opportunity to go to college and then start a career. Most people are in college between the age of 18 to 25. Some people get done at 22, but not always. Obviously, I'm still in college, but so it's not something we see all over. It's just something that happens when people are not forced into adult roles as quickly. Um, Part of emerging adulthood that is negative is the phenomena we call helicopter parenting. And these are parents who are overly involved in their emerging adult children. And so I last semester asked students in my class, "Do you have a helicopter parent?" And unfortunately, there were a lot of kids in my class, or kids, young adults, emerging adults in my class who had helicopter parents. One of my students said that their father, always wanted to know where they were, who they were seeing, like what they were doing, and she said that she wouldn't put it past him to come and spy. And I was like, okay, that's definitely the like archetype for helicopter parent. My dad, to an extent, is a helicopter parent. He worked. He used to work for a security company, and he installed this really great security system in my parents' house. And it literally, so everybody has their own app, and that's how you engage or disengage it, and everybody has their own password. And so the system logs every person the time and the person that people engage or disengage the system. So he can tell where if we come or go. So when I was staying with them over the holidays, I went out like after everyone had gone to bed because I wanted to hang out with some friends. And the next morning he said, "Where'd you go?" At 11 o'clock last night. And I was like, "What? How did you know that?" And he said, "The security system logged you." And I'm like, "Okay, that's too much. I am a grown woman. Like you cannot be spying on my whereabouts." So I don't know if that's so much helicopter parenting as it is a person who worked in security, just kind of knowing the ways of the world in a way that we don't. So, but yeah, helicopter parents are parents who really they take parenting to an extreme to the point where they don't want to let their kids have any independence. The problem with that is if you don't let your child explore their identity, or your young adult explore their identity, they're just gonna, as my mom would say, go off the deep end, where they go really wild because they're rebelling against these restrictive rules. And so it's better to just let people be themselves and let them figure themselves out than it is to try to tell them what to do. Because identities that aren't allowed to be expressed always lash out in the form of maladaptive behaviors. So our good old friend Eric Erickson said that during this period of early adulthood or young adulthood, emerging adulthood, the main conflict is intimacy versus isolation. So just to remind you of Erickson, how Erickson's theories work is he proposes, as do all psychoanalysts or psychoanalytic theorists, that the our development is really built around built on the foundation of us experiencing some kind of internal conflict between what we want to do and what we actually feel. And so, according to Erickson, and then obviously the resolution between these conflicts, wanting intimacy but feeling isolated, the resolution determines whether or not you have healthy development. And so, according to Erickson, during this period, establishing an intimate relationship is very important. And secure identity is essential to intimacy. So, um, people who don't have a secure identity, people who've not been allowed to explore their identity, tend to be insecure in their identity, and they're not able to form intimacy. So they end up feeling isolated from other people. And so that resolution of that conflict between intimacy and isolation for a non-secure person is going to be lasting development, negative psychosocial development, according to Erickson. On the other hand, people who are secure in their identity, who are allowed to explore their identity, will be intimate with other people and will end up on the more positive side of psychosocial development. He also proposed that early adults who have a strong sense of self or sense of who they are, tend to enter into deep committed relationships. In other words, and that's not to say people who don't have strong sense of self don't have relationships, but those relationships tend to be more shallow. They're not built on much because if the reality is, and we'll talk about this when we talk about relationships a little bit more. Um, Relationships that aren't founded on emotional and psychological intimacy and attraction rarely last very long. And so that's the difference between someone who has a strong sense of self and someone who doesn't. Is people who do have a strong sense of self tend to look for people who fulfill their emotional and psychological needs first. Whereas people who are insecure tend to look for relationships that just fill their sexual needs or their physical needs first. And so that's the explanation that Erickson has for why that happens. These same early adults are also more open to other people, more tolerant of diverse perspectives, and make better friends. In other words, people who are secure in who they are and know what they believe and they're okay with that tend to be more tolerant and tend to be more open. And people like that. We don't really like hanging out with people who are legalistic and try to force their worldview on you because the reality is those people are incredibly insecure about who they are. And we can sense that, deep down. An alternate viewpoint to this is Levinson's Seasons of Life. And Levinson proposed that our lives are comprised of transitions. And for early adults, there are two specific transitions. The first is the dream stage, or the dream season. And in the dream season, we have a picture of ourselves as adults, and we select mentors to help us achieve that dream. So when I was 19, more like 20. When I was 20, I had this dream of becoming a psychologist. That's what I wanted to be. And so to do that, I went to Auburn University, which I'm wearing this shirt today, yay! I went to Auburn University, where I'm going back to finish my degree, and the first psychology class I took there was developmental psychology, and I loved the professor, Dr. Elizabeth Preston Knight at Auburn University, like really awesome. Shout out to you, EBK. Um, she inspired me because she was exactly who I saw myself as, like 20 years down the road. Well, I guess maybe not 20 years, 10 years. I don't know. I don't want to guess how old she is. But but she matched the dream that I had for myself, and so I really latched onto her as a mentor, and we're still very good friends to this day, which is really it's one of the professional relationships that I have that I value a lot. Um, she really got me interested in working with children and understanding how we can improve the experiences of children so that their adult lives are better. Um, Another person I saw who was who's living the life that I wanted, was my undergraduate advisor, Dr. Tracy Whitty, also at Auburn, and we ended up publishing one paper together, maybe two, because I don't know if she's going to be on this one that I'm writing currently, but um, another person who really like helped me achieve the dream that I had of myself. Other people, uh, my some friends of mine from Auburn who were in graduate school. Jamie Gaucher, who's also a co-author on a paper of mine, was a really big mentor for me. Um, and so we all probably, all of you can think of people who are um, who've been influential in helping you achieve what you want to achieve. So those are your mentors. And we pick mentors who help us, or we think will help us get to the place where we want to go. Now, the second season within early adulthood is reversal. And this usually happens after we've achieved our dream or we've started to achieve our dream. And this is when our focus shifts to the things we neglected in pursuit of our dream. So instead of focusing on our career, maybe we focus on our family. And so what ends up happening in this early adulthood period, which lasts from the age of 18 to the 40s, is we spend probably most of our 20s really pursuing a job. We want to get our career, we want to establish ourselves, and then we get to about our 30s, or early 30s, and we think late 20s, early 30s, and we start to think, hey, maybe I want to settle down and have a family now. And so it's sort of a reversal. It's not that we're neglecting our dream or we're going back on our dream. It's that there's other things that we wanted that weren't sort of our primary goal, but that we're now seeking since we've reached the place where we want to be in our dream. A third, a third viewpoint is Vaillant's adaptations to life, or adaptation to life. And according to Vaillant, we have different motivations throughout our adult life. And so in our 20s, it's all about intimacy. So we want to, and you can tell these are all slightly different, so none of them are quite the same. So this is a little bit different than when we just talked about, where Levinson said our primary goal in the first half of our early adulthood is where we picture ourselves as an adult. Um, According to Vaillant, though, it's intimacy. In the 20s, we're all about intimacy. We want to have intimate relationships. And when I say intimacy and when Vaillant says intimacy, we're not talking about sexual intimacy, though that is part of it. We're talking about intimacy being a deep connection with another person. In the 30s, this changes to career success. We're very much focused on career success, and for a lot of people, this is true. You spend your 20s settling down, making friends, finding your identity, and then in your 30s, once you've gotten into your career, then you're really focused on advancing because you have the potentially the partner that you want, the children that you wanted, and you've got the friends that you wanted, and now you're trying to get the career that you want. And in your 40s, you start slowing down in terms of your career because you're usually pretty well established by this point. You are probably not going to go much further, and you're going to start thinking about retirement in 20 years. And so you're about halfway through your career. And because you're more established, your viewpoint starts to be more community focused. So, how can I give back to my community? How can I invest in my community? How can I build my community? Then in the 50s, your motivation becomes more of being a keeper of wisdom. And we all know the older people in our lives like to give us advice about how to live our lives. And that's because their motivation for living is being sort of this sage-like person that can provide insight to the younger generation. And then in the 70s, we're getting close to the end of life because the average age of mortality is about around 80, 85. The focus or the motivation becomes spiritual. We're focusing on our spiritual needs, whether that is through our religion or through some other kind of philosophic practice. People in their 70s tend to focus more on the spiritual side. Um, what was my purpose here? Did I fulfill that purpose? What's next for me? Preparations for death, essentially. Um, So you probably can think about, like, I can think about someone in each of these life stages, and it is true, for the most part. Most of the people I know in their 20s aren't looking for intimacy. A lot of my 30s friends are really trying to get ahead and work. In the 40s, there's a lot of the people that I know in their 40s are very involved in community service. My dad just turned 50 and he's very much in the keeper of wisdom motivation of life. And then the 70s spirituality. My grandmother, my dad's mother is has been chronically ill for the last 5 years, and she's definitely a lot of our conversations center on why am I here? Did I do a good job as a mother and grandmother? Like, is my legacy worth it? Just that sort of thing. Another distinct aspect of early adulthood is the social clock. And we've all experienced the social clock. And this is the term we use for the age-graded expectations for major life events. In other words, there's this sort of unspoken rule that by a certain age you have to reach a certain major life event. So, for example, um, in adolescence, age-graded expectation is by the age of 16 you'll get your driver's license. And so a lot of times that can put pressure on a person because conformity, so meeting that expectation, or departure, not meeting that expectation, from these expectations has an effect on personality development. If you conform to age graded expectations, your self esteem gets better. If you depart from it, say you're 18 and you still haven't gotten your driver's license, you probably are going to have lower self esteem. It also determines the level of independence that you have as a person. If you are meeting these age graded influences, you're probably going to have more independence. If you're not, you're probably going to have less independence for many different reasons. Also, your responsibility. Um, like, people who meet these age graded expectations may have more sense of responsibility. And those who don't may not. So, and it's important to realize this is mostly about perception. You can be 18 and never driven a car and be perfectly have perfectly good self-esteem, be very independent, and be socially responsible or very responsible. Um, but that could also be a part of where you're from. Like, I have a friend who's from the New York metro area and did not own a car until he was in his mid 20s because he didn't need one because he lived in the city and could take the subway everywhere. And so it was normal for him and his friends to not drive, to not have cars. Whereas, say if he grew up here in Fargo, it might be different. So it's important to remember that these age-graded expectations are very much dependent upon the culture in which you live, the society in which you live, and the expectations that they have for certain people in it. As part of the social clock, we use social comparisons to see how well we are adulting compared to others. So, for example, um, we might post on social media that we've just gotten around to doing laundry for the first time in a month to see if anybody else comments and says, "Oh yeah, me too." Because if a lot of people are doing it, then you're going to feel less bad about yourself than if people are like, "Oh, that's gross. I wonder you smell bad for the last like month." Um, it's sort of the same thing that we see in class, right? Where you get your test back and you ask a classmate, "Hey, how did you do?" So you can kind of see where you are in the ranking. It's the same idea. So for your discussion 24, I want you to tell me about some age graded expectations for major life events in adulthood. So you can't use driving, but you can use anything that we expect to happen to someone from 18 to death. So what are some age graded expectations? Think of a couple and write about them for your discussion for today. Let's shift now to middle adulthood. Our good friend Erickson, I just love that, Erickson. What where his parents thinking. Um, in middle adulthood, though, the focus shifts from identity development to generativity. And I think the best way to describe generativity is mentorship. It's just generating, it's creating things. And so that's what mentoring is all about. It's about creating someone. Sort of like the joke is like you are mentors, so you can create someone in your image, but I don't think that's always the case. A lot of times you just want to help someone reach their goals. Um, and so in order to be successful in middle adulthood in terms of psychosocial development, you have to be generative. You have to be using you're expending your primary energy on creating new things to carry on your legacy. Otherwise, you experience what's called stagnation. And stagnation occurs when people become self-indulgent and self-satisfied with their life success rather than engaging in mentorship. So rather than helping someone else achieve, you just step all over them to get more success for yourself. But you're not going to be satisfied. You're always going to be wanting more because during this period, Erickson proposes, what we really want is to ensure that our legacy is carried forward. Parenting really does provide a great context for generative behavior, especially among lower SES and minority men. So, in other words, generativity may not occur within the context of your workplace, but it may occur within the context of your home, where you may you may be a very low rung person at work. You may, for example, you could work as a custodian. I mean, there's not a lot of places to advance in that job. I mean, maybe like the senior custodian, but still, like you may not have the same opportunity to mentor, say, some like a professor. Like I have the opportunity each semester to mentor 200 or so students. Um, Whereas if I worked as a janitor or a custodian, I may only have the opportunity to mentor a couple people. Um, or any students who might come to me. I mean, that's always an option. But you could go home and have kids who look up to you, who you can then mentor, or grandkids even. And so that can provide a really great context. In fact, I think that our parents should be our greatest mentors. In my humble opinion, I think that you should be able to have a relationship with your kids where they can talk to you about anything and you can give them advice. That's the whole point of parenting. Unfortunately, we create this sort of almost hostile environment between parents and kids where they have to be perfect, or we give them the impression that they have to be perfect, and we get really upset with them when they do something wrong instead of being like compassionate and try to understand and communicate that you've been there too. um, Sometimes parents mentor other people's children better than their own, and I think that's really unfortunate. um, but I'm not a parent, so maybe I have no right to say it, but I mean, I'm getting a degree in developmental psychology. Okay, Levinson's Seasons of Life. So what does Levinson have to say about all this? Levinson identified several major themes of conflict in middle adulthood, things that really get in the way of us reaching our goal point, or our goal for middle adulthood. The first is young versus old. When you're in middle adulthood, you're kind of stuck in the middle. You're not young anymore, but you're also not old, right? Like you're still very young compared to. I mean, a 40-year-old is young compared to an 80-year old, or even a 60-year-old. There's still a lot of mobility, a lot of energy, a lot of cognitive prowess that you have as a 40 and 50-year-old that you start to lose when you turn 60, 70, 80. It can be hard though adjusting to that middle ground where you're like, well, I'm not getting any younger. I'm starting to get older. I'm really starting a very slow descent downward developmentally, socially. It's hard. And so that can be a really big conflict for a lot of people. Destruction versus a creation is another conflict. When people start to get into middle age, they start to realize the importance of the people that they care about, and a lot of times when the hot-headedness of youth wears off, you start to regret some of the things you've done in the past. And so there's this conflict of destruction versus creation where you're focusing on healing old wounds with other people. Another is masculinity versus femininity. There is this balancing act that has to occur in middle adulthood where hyper-masculine or hyper-feminine traits really start to balance themselves, and adults become much more androgynous. In fact, older adults there are obviously always exceptions to this, but for the most part, middle-aged adults, the older adults, tend to be much more androgynous than younger adults because you become more secure in your identity. It doesn't really matter to you if you're being masculine or feminine. Now, again, we have plenty of examples currently of old men who are hyper masculine and are not doing a very good job at their jobs. But you know who I'm talking about. And so, that definitely is a big conflict. And then engagement versus separateness. Um, and this is really big, and this is hard for a lot of people, but it's finding a balance between achievement, so doing really well and getting closer to your goals, and then self care, realizing that sometimes in the pursuit of our goals, we wear ourselves out and it's important to rest. And so that is definitely a major conflict in middle adulthood. Now, we a lot of times like to talk about this idea of a midlife crisis, and it's the theme of most like divorce tropes in films and books. The husband leaves the wife or younger woman and buys his car and like becomes this really ridiculous person because he's going through a midlife crisis. Is there a midlife crisis? Well, the answer is no, there is not. Middle age is a time for people to evaluate where they are going or where they've been and where they're going. So it's sort of you're kind of you're in the middle, right? And so you get to evaluate, have I done what I've wanted to do? And also, what do I want to do with the time that I have left? Now, for some people, this could be tumultuous. In other words, you look back at what you've done and you say, well, gee, I haven't done any of the things that I wanted to do. Or I really rushed into this marriage with this person that I really don't like, that doesn't like me, and we're just kind of sitting here suffering it out because of the kids. Like, you know, that's not where this isn't where I wanted to be when I turned 45. Um, I started this job because I thought that I was going to end up doing this, but the reality is I did something completely different, and this isn't what I wanted to do, and I'm miserable at it. Um, And so the result of this, it can be very tumultuous for people who are not where they want to be. Now, if you are where you want to be, then that's great. But, if people are not where they want to be, it can result in them making life changes. And this a lot of times comes across as sort of a midlife crisis. And it's always over amplified for the purpose of entertainment. But you will see people in middle age make life changes, like get a divorce, or buy a new house, or switch jobs, or move to another part of the country, because they realize they haven't done what they wanted to do. They've really neglected their own interests, their own self care because of um, for whatever reason. And they do so. They make these changes. They make these turning points, or they have these turning points to reconcile the turmoil. Now, it does not very often result in what we consider a midlife crisis. Most people are able to make these transitions successfully. um, so what we think of as a midlife crisis really doesn't exist, or at least not on the same scale as it would be suggested to us. Not everybody goes through this. Part of middle age is considering what our possible self could be. And our possible selves are future oriented representation of what we hope to become and what we're afraid of becoming. And you probably can think right now of what you want your possible self to be. Um, I want to be successful at my job, and the one thing I'm afraid of becoming is a person who just kind of slides through life and doesn't do the best that I can, right? Um, in middle age, though, there are really three different levels of this, or three components to the possible self. The first is self acceptance. In middle age, people tend to accept the good and the bad about themselves. So they're not as judgmental. They're like, well, I'm really funny and I'm really smart and I'm good at my job and that's great. I'm also overweight and I spend too much money on clothes. You know, not so great, but it is what it is. Autonomy is another big part of middle adulthood. Middle adults are much less concerned about what others think about them, so it's more of a social autonomy. And we all probably have middle-aged adults in our lives who kind of do whatever they want. My mom is a good example of that. She kind of just like goes through life and she doesn't really care what other people think about her, and I think it's really pretty cool. Um, And then mastery. Middle aged people tend to see themselves as competent in multiple domains. And so in early adulthood, we kind of see ourselves as an imposter. Like even things that we've done million times and we're really good at, we still sometimes feel like an imposter when we compare ourselves to other people. But by middle age, people see themselves, yeah, I'm really competent at this. I'm good at this. It can still be hard. You can still experience imposter syndrome at times. But for the most part, middle aged people tend to have a much more realistic understanding of their competency. And again, that kind of goes back to self acceptance and a little bit of autonomy. I mean, mastery doesn't necessarily infer that you're perfect. It just means that you're really good at it. So you accept the what things that you do that are really good and the things that are part of your competency that maybe aren't so good that you could still improve. Let's shift now into late adulthood. So again, this is uh, it's our 60s through the end of life. Late adulthood, according to Erickson, the main conflict is ego integrity versus despair. Now, to backtrack and refresh our memory on what the ego is, in psychoanalytic theory, there are three components to our psyche, or our psychological self. On Okay, I'm gonna use inside out characters. Um, okay, on the one side we have the id, okay, and the id is our own sense of what we want, our need to be fulfilled. Sexually, according to Freud, socially, according to Erickson, whatever. It's our need to get our own way and to have our needs met. On the other side, we have the superego. The superego is um, um, is sort of like our sense of what's expected of us, our understanding of social norms, our understanding of what other people want us to do. And so, for example, if I feel the need for intimacy, and I want to have intimacy emotionally, physically, whatever, with another woman, the id would say, let's do it. The superego would say, but wait a minute. We live in a society where that's not acceptable. What are you going to do about that? And so the id and the superego, are in this conflict, and the ego is our conscious understanding of this, or our conscious experience of this conflict, and the health of our ego depends on how we resolve the conflict. And according to Erickson, late adulthood is focused on coming to terms with one's life. So thinking about sort of the master struggle between all the things that we've wanted, and all the things that we've repressed because of our understanding of how our society would view us. And so people who are satisfied, who say, I did the best that I could, I've found pretty good balance between all these conflicts, they arrive at ego integrity. In other words, they say, okay, was consistent throughout my life. Whereas people who kind of just didn't have a lot of balance between the two, either went with their ego too much or went with their superego too much, or they did a mixture of both, they never really found resolution on anything, they're not going to have ego integrity and they're not going to be satisfied with where their life is. Peck built upon this by proposing that there are different components to ego integrity. The first is ego differentiation, and this is finding other ways to affirm self worth. So some people may not be happy with where they are in life. And ego differentiation is when our ego finds other ways to affirm our self-worth other than in our ability to balance out these different conflicts. The second is body transcendence. This is the emphasis on the rewards of thinking, experiencing emotions, and socializing over physical activity. In other words, it can be hard when you get older because you're not able to do as much physically. And so this can be a huge blow to your ego integrity, or to your ego, where you're like, well, I don't know, maybe I'm not going to be able to do all the things that I want to do. But if you have ego integrity, then you're able to say, okay, well, you know what? Thinking and emotion experience and socialization are just as fun as physical activity. I don't have to be defined by my lack of mobility any. And then ego transcendence. This is overcoming this sort of despair at death by imparting your wisdom on younger people, on finding some kind of spiritual or long term legacy building purpose. A huge conflict in older adulthood is aging, because aging ultimately results in death. And so, for a lot of older adults, aging can be incredibly distressing because it's a constant reminder that you're getting close to death or closer to death. So, every ache, every illness, every knee replacement is a reminder that you are slowly coming in for a landing. You're slowly coming out of the lifespan, and that can be very distressing. LaBoué proposed the affect optimization, or the ability to maximize positive emotions and dampen negative emotions. In other words, a way to cope with aging is to maximize every positive emotion that you have. If spending time with your grandkids makes you really happy, then you're going to do that as much as you can because it's going to maximize your positive emotions. If going to the doctor makes you feel bad, makes you feel sad, then you're going to avoid doing that as much as possible. You're only going to go when you absolutely have to, and that will dampen the negative emotions. Or, sometimes you can't avoid going to the doctor. So you say, okay, I'm going to go to the doctor, but right after that, I'm going to go see my grandkids. So you're sort of balancing out the negative with the positive. Within this coping process for aging, reminiscence, or thinking and talking about the past, is a way of processing your life and the satisfaction or despair that comes with it. Talking about things is really important, and one of the reasons that we oftentimes get trauma, experience trauma, and have trauma is because we don't talk about the things that happen to us, and they stay inside, and our brain is forced to process it alone. But when you think about it, when you're making an active effort to be conscious about the past, to be conscious about the things that have happened to you, it helps you to come to terms with it, to accept it, to say, okay, this happened and it was either really good or it was really bad, but you know what? There's nothing I can do about it now. It's in the past. All I can do is move forward now. And so that reminiscence is really important. And we see this all the time with older adults, that they talk about the past. They talk about their friends from the past. They like to talk about stories from when they were kids. And this is a way for them to look back on their life and say, did I do what I wanted to do? Was I the person that I wanted to be? Um, and a lot of times, this reminiscence is coupled with affect optimization. Older people will tell stories over and over and over again that are important to them. So, for example, my grandmother um, has had some bad things happen, and I want just to maintain her privacy. I won't tell you what has happened to her, but you know she has had some bad experiences in her life, and she does talk about those stories, and usually they come out when there's some kind of like similar life experience that's going on, and she talks about like how she felt, and it's sort of a way of her processing that grief that's still there. um, but she also like tells the same stories of her childhood over and over and over again. And if you ask her to tell stories about when she grew up on the farm, she loves to tell those stories. And so she tells stories, she reminisces about things that increase or maximize the positive emotions that come with telling that story. So it's a really excellent way to combine those two coping strategies. Now, there are some positive aspects of aging. It's not all terrible. Older adults tend to have a very secure and multifaceted self concept. They know who they are, they know what they want. Their self concept isn't built on a single thing, it's built on a lot of different things. I'm going to use my grandmother as an example again. And I've told her I used her as an example, and she was very honored. Um, so, my grandmother, I like to tell the story, when I came out to her, her response was, I don't understand what transgender is. I will never understand what transgender is because I'm too old and I just don't understand. But I know that I love you and I don't really care how you live your life. I just want you to be in mine. And I'd really thought that was a great perspective. And she told me later, she was like, when you get older, you figure out what's important to you and you just go with whatever. Like you just roll with it. And well, she didn't say roll with it. But that's my translation. You know, she knows who she is. She knows what she wants out of life. There's not her identity is not going to be called into question by somebody she cares about deviating from what she thinks people should be or do. Her identity isn't going to be affected by how other people see her. She knows who she is and she's okay with who she is. And it's multifaceted. She sees herself as a wife, as a grandmother, as a mother, as a Christian, as a homemaker. I mean, that's how she sees herself. And so it's not she sees herself as very kind, and she is very kind, one of the kindest people I've ever met. Giving, sacrificing, you know, herself for the people that she loves. I mean, those are all parts of her self-concept. So it's not just about one thing. Whereas when you're younger, you tend to be a little bit insecure about who you are, which is normal. It's perfectly fine. And also, our concept seems to be very singular, where I'm a student. You introduce yourself, and you're like, "Well, I'm a student." Right? And that's sort of your primary sense of self. Whereas you meet, an older person and you start talking to them, what do? They talk about their kids, they talk about their grandkids, they talk about some of their hobbies, but it's usually grandkids, kids, hobbies. And so they'll literally just talk to any older person and ask them, "Tell me about who you are," and they're going to describe the different things about who that make them who they are, and they're going to be very clear about it, and it's not going to be like it's just going to be what it is. There's a woman in my church. She likes to talk about her grandkids. She likes to talk about her garden. She likes to talk about church because she's very involved in church. She likes to talk about birding because that's what she likes. That's one of her hobbies, and so that's her very multifaceted self-concept. Older adults also tend to be very agreeable, very accepting of change, and very open to experiences. So, you know, there's always an exception. There are always older people who are not agreeable. But for the most part, older people are pretty agreeable if you're respectful and kind and, you know, you don't treat them, if you treat them with respect, they will be agreeable. That's the thing. And actually, this is a secret that it's not really a secret. It's pretty self-intuitive, but most people ignore older people in society and are kind of rude to them and treat them like they're idiots and they don't know what they're doing. If you show respect to older people, um, they will be one of the greatest allies that you can ever have. They will respect you and they'll listen to you, um, because you're demonstrating to them that you see them as a human being. And a lot of times we don't treat older people like that. We're just like, oh my gosh, this person just talked my ear off about their life story, and it's like, hey, this person used to be you, and you'll be this person one day. And so, just a little secret. They're very agreeable. Older people are agreeable with people who treat them with respect. They're very accepting of change, for the most part. They tend to go with whatever, and usually open to experiences. Not always. A lot of it depends on where they live and how they're treated. They also tend to value spirituality and religiosity, and so it becomes very important to them. And a lot of times, religion plays an important role in the life of older people. It gives them the ability to find some solace with aging, also gives them a place where they can meet other people, and provides a context for mentorship. Some of my best mentors currently are older adults in my church, who are, I would say, some of my best friends. These are people who are my grandparents' age. Like, I would say half of my adult friends in Fargo are, well, I guess I don't have non-adult friends. My non-early or emerging adult friends, most of my non-college friends are adults in their 60s, 70s, and 80s because they're such valuable people to have in your life. They tell you, they help give you really good advice. Um, I like to talk about relationship issues with one of my friends who's in her 60s, and I'm trying to explain, like, I can't see that there's anyone else, and she's like, look, I know it feels that way, but you deserve better than this. It's like straight to the point. It's clear, and you know what? She is right. And it's nice to have that. It's nice to have that mentorship. And so, look, she's engaging in generativity. Yay! She's gonna have integrity, ego integrity. Um, anyway, all right. So that's it for today. Shorter class, 50 minutes. For class on Monday, read pages 477 to 478, 539, 547 to 555, 610 to 619, 627 to 628. I want you to think about the question: what is the hardest part of getting older? From a psychological standpoint, at least. Remember, you need to be working on your projects because your writing assignment is due a week from today. Okay, so I don't want to like stress you out, but you need to be working. If you've not started writing or started your worksheets, you really, I mean, you have to today. It's due tomorrow. Um, Remember that your project worksheets are due tomorrow at noon, though I will take them as late as midnight, but I would prefer that you get them to me as soon as possible. Um, I will give you feedback by Saturday night, and I'll give you participation points for class tomorrow. Even though there's not a class meeting, you're just going to be emailing me something. I will give you points for sending me the email as well as for doing the worksheet. All right, let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns. Darcy.corbett, CORBITTHALL, at ndsu.edu. All right, see you later.